Hi everybody, welcome back to the Desmo Works channel, and today is video number 3 of 3 relating to the Ducati 2-valve heads that I've been doing in the last couple of videos. So if you remember, we stripped down a 750 Supersport IE set of heads from 2003 and then a set of Hypermotard 1100S engines, heads I think they are, from a 2008/9 model. So today what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to take you through the differences between the heads. So there's a capacity difference straight off bat, so there's 350cc difference between the heads, but there's 5 years between the 750 heads and the 1100 heads, and what I wanted to just talk through is some of the differences in the engineering and the makeup of those heads. I'm not a tuner, by the way, so I'm not going to be talking about combustion volumes, etc. I'm just going to talk about the physical difference in the actual components that are in those heads. So I'm going to try and do this as a single run through. It's unscripted, so I might waffle a little bit, but hopefully there'll be something of interest to you in this video, and I hope you enjoy it. If you're not a subscriber to the channel, please hit that subscribe button before we get into the video, and at the end of the video, if you enjoyed it, give us a like. Let's get into this then. Okay, first off, we've got the 750 SSIE head from 2003, and I'm going to be comparing the vertical head. So this is the vertical head for the 750, and here we've got the vertical head from the 1100. So this is a 2008/9 model. Okay, so straight off the bat, you'll see that in terms of the components that are laid out, there is not much difference in the total number of parts between the heads. Let's talk about the heads themselves. You can quite clearly see there's some architectural differences between how the heads are constructed. So the 750 uses valve covers that have a gasket on both sides. You can see that the valve seal arrangement is a slip over cover, and you'll see what I mean when we talk about the 1100s heads in a second. The cam itself runs in a bearing inside the head, so you might just be able to make that out there. There's actually one inside the head, and there's another just inside there, so it's supported by two at this end. And more importantly, the actual cam cover has got a bearing in it as well, so there's a distinct difference in the makeup of those heads there. This being an early 2-valve engine is a single spark plug, and the head design is stepped, so it doesn't use a gasket between the head and the cylinder when you put it back together. The 1100 head, so you can see straight away we've got a slightly different valve cover arrangement. It's circular, and that's because it uses these valve covers with a rubber O-ring in them. You'll notice no bearings to support the actual camshaft, so it runs on a journal surface all the way through. So all the way through there you can see no bearing in there at all. So completely different arrangement for supporting the cam when it's turning, which also means the oil feed is far more critical in this area. And then you'll see that the valve seals are very similar to what you get in the later engines. So it's a more traditional valve seal with a metal casing that drives onto the actual valve guide rather than a lip on the valve guide as per the 750 head. And being a Hypermotard 1100 engine, dual spark, it's got 2 spark plugs, and you'll notice now that we've also got a flat surface on the base of the head because the later engines use a head gasket. Okay, so let's talk camshaft, and you can see here the 1100 camshaft. It's quite big, it's got quite a large shaft on the drive end. This is the journal surface at the drive end, And then at the back end of the camshaft, you've got the large sort of timing location disc, and also the part of the camshaft that drives in the back journal surface on the 1100 head. Now, interestingly, it is much more substantial than the 750 camshaft. Let's just pick that up and do a quick comparison. So you've got the 1100 and the 750 camshaft side by side, and you can see that the 750 is a smaller camshaft, so it doesn't have the large disc at the end because this sits in the cap, the camshaft cap bearing, and then on the drive end it would also sit in the two bearings. It's got a collar for one of the bearings to sit in, and then it sits in a bearing further up the drive shaft, and you can see that the actual camshaft diameter itself is smaller, and the distance between the webs roughly the same, but you don't have this large disc at the end. But here's the interesting piece. Let's just weigh the two camshafts. You've got the 750 camshaft is roughly a pound in weight. I don't know if you can make that out on my cheap little kitchen scales. Now the much more substantial 1100 camshaft is actually 0.9 of a pound, so it's actually lighter. So you've got the 1100 camshaft is actually hollow, so despite being more substantial in size, it's actually been engineered to be lighter. Sticking with camshafts, we can see that the camshaft cover for the 1100 doesn't support the camshaft at all. It's just a sealing arrangement. You've got the location for the timing tool to go in and time the head, whereas the 750 camshaft cover is a support mechanism. So it's got a bearing in it, sits much deeper into the head. It also needs a gasket to seal it, whereas the 1100 one used a seal, an O-seal. So this is substantially heavier. Let's talk about head weights now. We rest the vertical head from the 1100 on the scales. You're looking at about 7.8 pounds roughly, whereas the 750 head is 8.6 pounds. So a lot more weight in a smaller head. If we now talk rocker arms, so the design of the rockers, so this is the closing ones, are actually very, very similar. So the actual rocker arms, slightly different materials used in their construction. You can see that in the colour difference. But the main difference is the length of the rocker pin. And you'll also notice on the 1100 rocker pin, there's a sealing arrangement to improve the oil retention along the rocker arm groove that's there to lubricate the setup. So again, the 750 one is going to be slightly heavier. Again, same for the opening rockers. You'll see that if I put the 750 against the 1100 at the back there is slightly smaller, and again has the sealing arrangement. The actual rocker arms themselves are again near identical in size, and layout is just slightly better material has evidently been used. Right, so then we've got valves. You'll see the 1100 intake valve versus the 750. Much bigger difference in sizes. You've got one that's roughly 45mm for the 1100 and about 40mm for the 750. The other thing that's different between them is that you've got a much narrower stem on the 1100. This is 7mm versus 8mm. So that carries through to our exhaust valves. So again, if I flip them over, you'll see that the 1100 is much bigger than the 750. You're looking at about 40mm versus I think about 35mm, and same again, 7mm stem versus an 8mm stem for the 750. That means shims are slightly different. So you've got 7mm closer opener, 8mm closer opener. Hopefully you can just make out a slightly different construction on the close-in shims. The collet location face is higher up, and it's got a wasted design, so it's got a flanged end, much more pronounced, to the 7mm closing shim, with a collet location position much further in, not as heavily wasted. And then in terms of the opening shims, which hopefully we can just get focused, you've got the 7mm quite small against the 8mm, which is quite substantial. So again, we've got slight differences in those shims. So this is the valve cover for the 1100, made of plastic and uses O-seal as its sealing arrangement, versus the 750 that uses a gasket arrangement and is made of aluminium and is much larger. So just as a final finishing, you'll notice that roughly in terms of total components, they're pretty equal. There's not much more parts between one head or another. We are missing the gasket for the vertical head on the 1100 engine, whereas I do have the seals there that would be used for the 750 head. So I mean, these would be slightly lighter obviously than the gasket that's used, but that's not going to make a massive difference. So what you can see here is in the genesis of the two valve head, 5 years difference between these two heads. Much older design, I must admit. So this 750 at 2003 was in the last few years of Ducati using this sort of designer head. This was the more modern approach for their two valve heads. But you can see the difference in the engineering that has significantly brought the weight down, despite the head being bigger valves, bigger cams. So it's, and as Ducati owners, you'll know that the engine weight plays a massive part of the bike weight because of how the frame sits around it and uses it pretty much as a stressed member for support of things like the swing arm, etc. So getting the weight down in any part of the engine makes a massive difference to the overall weight and rideability of the bike. Okay, hope you found that video of interest. I didn't manage to do it all in one take in the end, and that's because when I went back and uploaded the video, because of its length, it cuts it into a couple of clips for me, and one of them had been corrupted. It didn't come in a file that I could open, so I've had to come back out and re-film parts of that. So I failed on that immediate talk through, but hopefully you've gained some useful information from that. You'll be able to see the differences there in some of the sizes and component designs between the two valve heads. So if you're working on the different heads, you'll be able to understand that there is differences between those parts if you're buying them second hand. So be very critical on making sure that you're getting the right components if you are sourcing second hand parts. It's easier if you're doing newer because you just use the part numbers. But hopefully you can see from that short little video the level of work that Ducati had been putting in over the years, even with the two valve development, despite the fact that that's quite old technology for Ducati in terms of the genesis of their bike range. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, chuck us a like down below. If you're not a subscriber to the channel, please hit that subscribe button and notification bell, because the builds are coming shortly. We'll be putting I think the 750 back together soon. The camshafts are way to be balanced. All the parts are now here. So hopefully next video, 750 is going back together. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Cheers then. Bye.